We good?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the November 2022 Audit and Finance Committee meeting. Little technical difficulties there getting started. I will call the meeting to order, and I'm told that I'm supposed to turn it immediately over to Shauna, so I'm gonna do as told reluctantly.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Good afternoon, everyone. So we would like to take this opportunity to honor two of our committee members who are also board members, Ms. Green and Ms. Coates. Ms. Coates is not with us at this meeting today, but on behalf of the district, Ms. Green, we would like to present you with this lovely gift for your
Thank you.
dedication and service.
Thank you.
And thank you for keeping us good financial stewards over our children and resources.
Thank you. Indeed, been my honor to serve in this capacity. I've really enjoyed working with all of you, and I'm a crybaby, so we won't prolong that. We'll keep moving, but thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Don't make me cry, Mr. Yeah, okay.
We don't cry. It's hard facts and data. So the facts are, you've been a strong supporter of the district on the work, especially with me when I was with Shauna's role as CFO. You came in this when we were rebuilding our fund balance, and you stayed on target, ensuring that we were able to put the district in strong financial footing. As a result of that, we are strong financial footing as our internal auditor.
Yeah.
And also help us maintain our bond rating, which, as you know, is extremely important. So, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your willingness to offer your advice to not only but to the town board. So you've been a strong steward. So I want not just the community to know that, the community to know that, but also the community to be a strong steward of our Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kennedy. Yep, advice I offer freely. Okay, so if I could get a motion on the adoption of the agenda.
A motion adoption of the agenda.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the approval of the minutes from October 4th, 2022. Are there any corrections or changes to the minute? Need a motion to
approve.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the next item is a presentation by Ms. Williams and Elliot Davis on the 2022 payroll HR internal audit.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We have Elliot Davis on the Zoom. They'll be reviewing our 2022 payroll HR audit. I'll turn it over to them at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. On the call today, we have myself, Austin Miller, and Jay Breitz as well. We're both representing the Elliot Davis internal audit team. And I will attempt to share my screen with the group. That always goes very smoothly. Technology is involved, so 1 second. Are you all able to see this?
Mhm.
Great. Yeah, so as mentioned, the scope of this internal audit engagement was payroll and human resources. The summary today will be relatively high level for this audience, but if there are any desires to see the evaluation and the details and more specifics, we are happy to share that. Management can share that with you as well. There's a more full report that includes, details of any findings, recommendations, the scope of the review, et cetera. So just want to call that out at the beginning that we'll be keeping it a little bit more high level for this audience, but happy to share more detail if desired. So starting with the scope of the audit. You can see there are a number of areas here, primarily focused on various payroll functions. Some of the key areas that were looked at: reviews and approvals, so including time cards and any salary changes, making sure that payroll was reviewed and approved in a timely manner and by the appropriate personnel. General ledger reconciliation, so ensuring that payroll within the payroll system reconciles to that within the finance and accounting system. Employee listing reconciliations, ensuring those that are getting paid are still current employees. There's no terminated employees that continue to get payment. Personnel record retention, so ensuring that personnel details, personal information, any type of sensitive information is retained according to policy and best practice. Budgets versus actuals, reviewing any budgets that were output by the finance department and comparing that to the actuals to ensure that payroll was within anticipated thresholds. Accruals, looking at the accounting function to ensure that those are made correctly. Health insurance refunds, so this is a little bit skewed towards the benefit side, but ensuring that PIBA refunds issued to departing employees were calculated and issued correctly. Any tax withholding information that are selected by employees. IRS 940, 941 forms, again, referring to taxes on payroll, and then just general payroll system access, ensuring that those that have the ability to make changes to payroll or approve payroll and salary updates are restricted to the appropriate personnel. So just kind of a high level overview of what we looked at and various risks, controls, policies, procedures related to each of these areas. As part of that, just kind of a quick overview of our process. So we actually completed a risk assessment, I believe it was in 2020 at this point, so a couple of years ago, to identify various departments or areas within the district that would require an audit at some point. So that is kind of how this internal audit came about. It was just that time within the audit plan to execute on the payroll and HR area within the district. We've covered a few different areas previously. And based on that, we identified the key stakeholders to meet with and perform some walkthroughs to understand exactly what is supposed to happen within the payroll function and the various other functions that we looked at on the previous slide, to ensure that we understand what is supposed to be happening according to policy, procedure, best practice. And from there, we dive a little bit deeper and look at, for this particular audit, we're looking at various payroll runs, time card entries, payroll updates, taking a sample of actual kind of transactions to test whether they were compliant with how things are supposed to be done. So based on the walkthroughs and reviews of policies and our understanding of how things should be done, were they actually performed according to policy and best practice. And finally, when we complete all of our testing, we summarize that into a report, which includes findings, recommendations, best practices, and recommended corrective action plans that we work with management to resolve any issues that were identified during the audit. So for this particular audit, again, if you would like to see more details, we have that within the full report, but this should be a pretty good overview of kind of what the results were. So overall, the rating, what we categorize as satisfactory with recommendations, and you can see in that first block here what exactly that means. Basically, overall, there were no material or significant deficiencies in the internal control structure or significant lack of compliance within with internal district policies or processes. Internal controls appear to be mitigating risk appropriately. However, there are some findings or recommendations that were identified to potentially improve a little bit further. So overall, nothing that jumped out as significant, but still some areas that could be improved upon. some of those observations or recommendations that we identified fall within the following areas: terminate employee offboarding process and the timeliness of that, employee listing reconciliation, review and approval process, pay rate, salary change and time card reviews and approvals and the timeliness around that, payroll HR policy and procedure reviews and approvals, payroll system audit trail capabilities, and then those health insurance refunds or the PIBA refunds I was mentioning before, some improvements to that calculation process. And one thing I do want to note here is that over the past few months, we have worked very closely with the payroll and HR personnel to provide some guidance while they establish and begin executing on the corrective action plans. So these are definitely either completed or well underway for each of the findings that we had. We've been plugged in along the way to make sure that steps are taken to remediate each of these issues. Really, that's all that we have. Again, any additional details that you would like to see, management can provide the full report. But other than that, are there any questions, concerns, thoughts, any other feedback?
Yes, Austin, can you tell us if there, in your findings or recommendations, if there were any repeat findings from previous audits?
So unfortunately, this is actually the first audit that Elliott Davis has completed within this area. So we cannot speak to prior audit findings for this particular area. I'm not sure if Shauna or Jackie or anyone would have any insights into that, but to our knowledge, no. But again, we might not have all the information for that.
You're absolutely correct, Austin. Ms. Green, we went back and looked at our prior audits. None of these are repeat findings. We did have a risk assessment a couple of years ago, I think, where one item was on that we've since put corrective action plans in place.
Okay.
So this is Kent. Kudos to the team. It sounds like this was a positive result, positive findings. So which is great news. Austin, you mentioned that the team has been working on whatever cleanup items you've identified that they should address. What's the process for going back and making sure those items are addressed? And like your work is presumably close to done with this process, but what's the follow-up mechanism to make sure that whatever, even small things, hopefully get remediated?
Absolutely, yeah. So there is a revalidation process that we will take. Typically, we like to see the remediation to have been implemented for at least 6 months to ensure that any issues are ironed out and making sure that they are carried out consistently. So I think at this point, the scope of the prior audit was calendar year 2021. So I think for the most part, many of these corrective action plans will have been implemented by the end of this year. So I anticipate beginning, calendar year 2023, we can begin reviewing the corrective action plans and invalidating whether those have been sufficiently implemented and are addressing the findings.
I can also add additional context to what Austin is saying. So after the preliminary recommendations came out, the HR and finance team, we met together to discuss and to review where we could build out the corrective action plans. We then put that on a project timeline. So we have internal meetings where we review and follow up the items. And as Austin said, the majority of these either have been remediated or will be remediated by the end of this fiscal year. So processes are currently underway. So there won't be a repeat finding or recommendation made next year.
And there are no nothing that would stand in the way of staff being able to implement these changes. I mean, like cost prohibitive or any budget stuff, nothing along those lines.
No, ma'am. Most of the items are more so related to internal controls, process documentation. So like, I'll give an example, the payroll and HR policy and procedures review and approval. That's just us making sure that we document processes, have an annual review and approval process. That's something we can implement fairly simply, it's not cost prohibitive or anything of that nature.
Okay. Kent, I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up question? I just kind of
No.
interrupted you.
No, I was just saying great and thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone on the committee?
Just to see the full findings and what the corrective action were, if we could see that, if we could get a copy of that, just the full document of what the findings were, what the corrective actions were
Okay,
that were put in place, and just to have to follow.
Sounds good. Yeah, and we'll let Shauna share that internally with the relevant stakeholders.
Shauna says she will get that to the committee members.
Thank you.
Good job, everyone involved, and Austin, thank you for your report. If there are no other questions regarding the internal audit, the next item on the agenda is the preliminary financial audit results. And Shauna,
Yes, we have Emily here from Green Finney, our external auditor. She'll present the FY22 preliminary financial audits. I'm going to steal a little thunder because I'm super excited about this. There were no audit findings.
yeah,
So we are in excellent financial condition. But I'm sorry, Emily, you can proceed with your presentation.
That's quite all right. It's accurate and it is great news. So
absolutely. I saw that.
don't blame you for wanting to share it yourself. So I'm Emily Sobchak. I'm with Green Finney Colley, and I'm here to present the preliminary results of the fiscal 2022 financial statement audit. We have completed the majority of test work, but we are still going through our review process. And so that's why results aren't quite final yet. But I do like to start by reminding you of the district's responsibility when it comes to your financial statements. The financial information that is provided for audit purposes is the responsibility of the district. And so it's important that you have good policies and procedures in place to ensure that the financial information that you're providing to us and also that's provided to the board throughout the year, that information is reliable. And so I love hearing the results of the internal audit projects. That's an important piece of ensuring that your policies and procedures are best at addressing the risks that the district is facing. So our responsibility as your auditor is to audit the financial information provided and then issue an opinion based on our audit. So we do anticipate issuing an unmodified opinion again this year. That opinion provides reasonable assurance that the financial statements are materially correct. So it's important to keep in mind that that we're giving reasonable assurance, which is a high level of assurance, but not absolute. And also that we are not auditing down to the dollar. We're not looking at every single transaction that occurred during the year. Rather, we are using some professional judgment in determining our audit procedures. Also, as part of our audit, we are required to obtain an understanding of your internal controls. That's typically done through walkthroughs and through inquiry. With the exception of our single audit process, we typically don't test your internal controls. Rather, we get an understanding of them and we review your policies and procedures to ensure that, that we don't identify any significant deficiencies there. So let's look at your general fund financial results. The total fund balance in your general fund increased by 13.7 million, bringing total fund balance to 159 million as of June 30th. Included in that balance is what's classified as non-spendable fund balance of 6.8 million. That's primarily related to prepaid insurance premiums. And so those funds are not available for future spending because they have already been spent. You also have committed fund balance of 72.6 million. That is committed by the board. You also have assigned fund balance of 41.6 million. That includes amounts that are assigned for the fiscal 23 budget. And you also have assignments for your ESSER sustainability and the ESSER stabilization funds. And again, those amounts are designated by the board. So if we take out those amounts that are designated for specific purposes, we're left with unassigned fund balance of 37.4 million. In order to gauge how healthy your fund balance is, we like to compare it to your operating expenditures. And so your unassigned fund balance represents about 6.3% of your actual 2022 expenditures, or 5.7% of your budgeted 2023 expenditures. Now, I know that those percentages might sound a little bit low, but it's important to understand that the reason why they're low is because the board has made these commitments to ensure that fund balance as a whole stays at a reasonable level. And so it is the district's policy to require 12.5% of your operating expenditures in your committed reserves, and then an additional minimum of 4.2% in your unassigned fund balance. So as you can see, you are in compliance with. Some reasons why it's important to have that fund balance. One is for cash flow purposes. Your property tax revenues don't start coming in until December and January. And so having a healthy fund balance allows you to meet your operating cash flow needs in the second half of the calendar year. It also gives you flexibility in determining which programs and services you're offering. And that's especially important in these current years where you are receiving significant additional funding through the ESSER program, but that funding will not be recurring. And so once it's spent, you don't have another funding source that's going to replace it at the same level. And so I do appreciate that the board has seen that and has designated some additional reserves so that the programs that you're providing with that funding that are really working and that you'd like to continue providing, that you will be able to find other funding sources to meet those needs. So let's look at your general fund revenues. Total revenues were $588.5 million for 2022. And that was a 6% increase from the prior year. The increase was primarily related to increases in property tax revenues, as well as your state revenues. And revenues came in about 2% better than budget. In addition to your revenues, the general fund also reports transfers in, which are identified as another financing source of $17.8 million. That includes transfers from the EIA funding of $12.4 million and indirect cost funding from your special revenue and food service funds of $5.4 million. On the expenditure side, you had general fund expenditures of $591.5 million. That was a 4% increase from the prior year, and that increase was primarily in your salaries and benefits. Personnel costs account for about 70% of your general fund budget, so it is to be expected that any significant changes are driven by those costs. So in addition to your general fund, you also report your special revenue funds. That includes the special projects fund that had a fund balance of approximately $10.4 million as of year end. That includes $4.2 million related to your pupil activities, which, as you'll recall, last year we had to begin reporting those in your special projects fund. And then the remaining fund balance is $6.2 million, which is assigned for special programs. The revenues in your special projects fund were $137.6 million, and that is primarily related to state and federal grant funding. The EIA fund is where you report your state EIA funding. That fund does not carry a fund balance, as any funds that are received but unspent during the year are required to be deferred to the next year. And that fund reported revenues of just under $34 million for fiscal 22. The food service fund had a fund balance of about $9.3 million as of year end. That includes non-spendable inventory of $451,000. and $8.9 million that's restricted for your food service programs. Food service fund reported revenues of $39.1 million, and that of course primarily reflects your federal reimbursements for the child nutrition program. You also report the capital projects district fund. That fund is where you report the 1% sales tax revenues, which were the total revenues were $155.4 million, primarily related to your sales tax revenues. That fund had a fund balance of $96.5 million as of year end, and that is entirely restricted for capital projects. Your debt service district fund reported a deficit fund balance as of year end of 25.6 million. That deficit is primarily driven by the reporting of your short-term bond anticipation notes. So as you'll recall, at the fund level, we're generally not reporting debt. Your long-term debt is only reported on the full accrual. However, GAAP does require us to report any short-term debt issuances. So issuances that will be paid within a year, those are reported as a liability at the fund level. And so that's why that 61.7 million is reported in your debt service district fund. On the debt service C fund, you had a fund balance of about 455,000, and that is restricted for debt service. Your total debt service payments in the C fund were 37.6 million, and those payments are funded through transfers from your debt service district fund. So transfers of your debt service millage to make those payments. So at the government-wide level, we do report on a full accrual basis. So like I said, whereas your funds primarily focus on current assets and current liabilities, your government-wide statements will report long-term assets and obligations. Two of those obligations that we have been reporting for several years now are your net pension and net OPEB liabilities. So the net pension liability relates to your participation in the state retirement system. And so while the liability is quite significant, 595 million as of June 30th, it's important to understand that that is simply your allocated piece of the system's unfunded actuarial liability. And so not only is it not a direct liability of the district, but it's also an estimate. That estimate is based on a number of different assumptions, and small changes in any of those assumptions could significantly affect the liability that we're reporting. And so for that reason, it's much more important to focus on what does impact your operating budget and your cash flow. The employer contribution rate was 16.5% for fiscal 22. That was an increase of 1% from the prior year. And that rate has increased again to fiscal 23. We're now at 17.5%. And it is scheduled to increase again in fiscal 24 when we'll be at 18.5%. And then it is expected to hold at 18.5% for the foreseeable future. So, you know, those of course have significant impacts on your operating budget since your budget does consist so significantly of personnel costs. Very similar to the net pension liability is the net OPEB liability. This relates to your participation in the state retiree healthcare system. And again, these liabilities don't impact your fund level statements. And just like the net pension liability, the net OPEB liability is your allocated piece of the retiree healthcare system's unfunded actuarial liability. So again, that liability is not a direct liability of the district, and it is an estimate. That the employer contribution rate for your retiree healthcare plan was 6.25%. That was consistent with the prior year, and that rate has not changed for fiscal 23. Right. So looking at your capital assets, you reported capital assets of 2.3 billion as of June 30th. That was an increase from the prior year as capital additions exceeded your depreciation expense. Some of your most significant capital additions for the current year were the completion of the Center for Advanced Studies at West Ashley High, the expansion of Hot Gap Middle School, and the Career and Technology addition at Baptist Hill High School. Outstanding construction commitments as of year end were 41.3 million. On the long-term obligations side, we have total long-term obligations of 524.2 million. That was a decrease of 54 million from the prior year, relating primarily to the principal payments made in 2022. You do also report the short-term bond anticipation notes of 217 million that were outstanding as of June 30th, and those will be repaid in fiscal 23. In addition to your long-term debt, you also report compensated absences that represents your earned but unused vacation leave, and that amounted to 6.7 million as of year end. So no significant new accounting changes in fiscal 22, but I do want to highlight a new standard that will be effective for fiscal 23, and that is GASB number 96. It provides guidance for subscription-based IT arrangements. And so for any significant software subscriptions that you have outstanding, where you have committed to a long-term subscription, you will be required to report an intangible right to use asset and a corresponding liability. That implementation will not affect your fund level. It will only affect your government-wide level financial statements. Okay, so in addition to the opinion that's provided in the front of your financial statements, we also have two opinions that are in the back of your financial statements related to the compliance portion of our audit. The first relates to the financial statement audit, and it describes our responsibilities in accordance with government auditing standards. And so I'm very pleased to report that we have no financial statement audit findings to report for fiscal 22. And so that really reflects on the hard work of management and your staff and everyone working hard to ensure that the financial information is complete, accurate, and reliable. We also perform a single audit each year. That's the audit that's required by the federal government related to your federal expenditures. This year, we looked at the Title I program, we looked at ESSER, and we looked at Head Start. And while, again, I have to provide the caveat that all of our reviews are not yet complete, but at this time, no findings to report related to your single audit either. So again, I applaud all of the hard work that goes into that and ensuring that things are done properly, especially given the recent changes and increases in complexity to the funding that you're receiving. That really reflects highly on the district. So in addition to the financial statements, we also issue a management letter each year that provides required communications from us to the board and to management. And that is an area where we do like to include matters that we think are of significance that need to be in writing for the board to be aware of, but things that don't rise to the level of being a finding in your audit report. And so one area that we do think is of particular risk at all school districts is your pupil activity funds. They are a disaggregated funding source, so cash receipts are coming in at the schools, and we believe that that does that is an inherently risky area, and so we do just like to remind you of that risk there. So at this time, I'm happy to take any questions that y'all have.
Any questions from members of the committee? Emily, I'd like for you to expound a little bit on the pupil activity fund. Can you just go in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So these funds, these are the funds that are collected at the school level. And so that might be activity fees, it might be field trip money, yearbook funding, all of the different types of receipts that come in through the schools. And so at each school, you have a bookkeeper or maybe more than one that is responsible for reconciling those funds and making the deposits. But remember, a lot of those funds are collected in the classroom. And so for that reason, there's just an additional risk that that some of the some of the funds might not make it to the bank, that some of the funding might be recorded improperly due to the disaggregated nature of them.
Yeah, I can see that could create all kinds of headaches. Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any specific? You mentioned that this is a kind of a common concern for school districts because they all have this disaggregated sources of revenue coming in that has to be navigated. Do you see anything either specific to CCSD that is problematic in terms of the way we somehow operate or oversee that, or any specific recommendations that CCSD in particular needs to consider implementing?
No, there weren't any specific concerns that we had related to y'all's process for handling those funds. We do believe y'all provide good oversight. And the reason that we include that is simply to make sure that you're aware of the inherent risk of those funds.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, Emily, thank you for that report. And Shauna and Ms. Kennedy, and I'll recognize you in a minute, and everybody who is, associated with the good news. Thank you guys for what you do and what you will continue to do to make, because that's kind of phenomenal, that of the findings. So we're happy about that.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Here, here.
Yes, I think two things. One, congratulations to Sean and her team. I was telling her this morning that I was really proud of she had they have. That's what we are proud of. They always have had somebody back to great job.
I'm sorry, I think we're having trouble hearing you, Mr. Kennedy. I don't think it's just me, but speak up other.
Having a problem hearing.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
A little better, I think.
Is it your mic?
Is that, oh,
It's better for us.
yeah, better mic. So I was just congratulating Sean and her team on the outstanding work they've done in finance. And then the other point I wanted to make is that typically in the past, what we've done because of these preliminary results, the audit firm will issue the financial statements to the state at the end of this month, and assuming that there are no material changes in what was presented to the committee today, then they would the audit firm would not come back to the audit and finance committee. We just go to the board in December at the December meeting to present the results. I was just thinking a few minutes ago, maybe I would propose to the committee that this year we asked the firm Green Finny to come and present to the board in November 14th meeting, since this is that would be the last meeting for this current board. And then if there's any substantial changes between then and the December timeframe, they can come back and present again.
Does anybody have any opposition to that? Any of the committee members? I think it's a good idea, since a lot of the current board members most of the current board members will be rotating off, are not running for re-election. So are you guys, I don't mean guys exclusively, but are members of the committee okay with that recommendation from Mr. Kennedy?
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's a good idea. Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next item is the disparity study update. I understand we had somewhat of maybe a revamp from the last time, and Shauna will explain that, and I think someone from the Miller firm will be on to discuss it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Green. So we had the community hearings that were the last step to the engagement piece of the audit, or to the disparity study. So we brought Miller 3 back to re-engage and cover their the results, findings, and recommendations. And so I believe Mr. Miller is on. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Dave Miller.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for allowing us to come back. We presented the crux of disparity study findings during the last Audit and Finance Committee meeting on the 4th of October. And so to Ms. Williams' point, this conversation today, while it will include some of the tenets of the earlier presentation, is really focused around the findings and recommendations. And so with that, I'll introduce to this body, Sherry Williams. Sherry Williams served as a project manager for this effort, and she will be guiding us through today's presentation. And so if you will, Sherry, take over.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation to you. First of all, we would like to acknowledge the leadership and commitment of CCSD in supporting us on this effort. There was a lot of data and interviews gathered across the organization, and we just wanted to stop and say thank you. In terms of the outline of our presentation, it is in 3 parts. the approach and methodology, the statistical analysis and qualitative findings and conclusions and recommendations. This is a 40-slide presentation, which we will not go through all 40 slides, but it will be made available to you so that if you would like to study it, you have it available. We will focus on the approach and methodology, the statistical analysis, and the high-level discussion of the conclusions and recommendations in the time that we have. So if we look at the approach and methodology, we have a 10-part methodology, which is represented under the industry statistical and market analysis. Under the industry analysis, we first conduct the legal analysis to determine the legal landscape for race and gender conscious initiatives within your jurisdiction. We then look at a procurement and MWBE program operational analysis to understand the impact of your policies, procedures, and practices on the ability of small minority and women-owned businesses to do business with you. And in fact, most of our recommendations flow out of this analysis, and many of them are, in fact, race neutral. We then move to the statistical analysis, which consists of 5 components: relevant market, availability, utilization, disparity, and capacity. And today I'm going to talk to you about the first 4. In the market analysis, along with the capacity analysis, that last quantitative analysis, we're looking to understand what factors are impacting those disparity ratios. And so the capacity analysis helps us to understand from a regression and statistical standpoint whether there are factors other than race and gender that may be contributing to any disparity found. The anecdotal survey analysis assists us into understanding the perceptions and the experiences of both minority and women-owned firms and non-minority and women-owned firms. The race and gender neutral analysis helps us to understand whether management, technical, and financial assistance programs are effective alone in assisting minority and women-owned businesses to capture contracts with you or to increase their revenues. And then the marketplace analysis gives us insight into your overall marketplace, as well as the private sector in particular, to see if there are factors that are in your marketplace that are making it more difficult for minority and women-owned firms to do business with you. With those analyses, it leads to customized conclusions and recommendations, and those recommendations tend to be both race gender conscious and race gender neutral. So let's proceed to the statistical findings. The first part of a disparity study is to determine the relevant market. And that is the area where you conduct about 70 to 75% of your commercial contracting activity. Here are the findings by procurement category for each of the areas that we looked at. For A&E, it was the state of South Carolina. For construction, it was nationwide, and for the other procurement categories, it was nationwide. We note here that our A&E and construction typically are refined to the MSA, but based on your data, there was a much broader marketplace from which you were procuring these services. Now, the next area, once we understand the relevant market, we look at availability. And Miller 3, since 1990, has been we created what we call the Ready, Willing, and Able analysis. Ready means firms exist, phone book analysis. Willing means firms understand the requirements of the work being requested and have come forth in some way to show that they are interested in doing the work, whether it be on your bidders list, getting certified, registering as a vendor, or actually performing work for you. And then ABLE shows those firms with the capacity to do the job. When we look at RWA, we look at it in different levels based on the data that we obtain from you. And what we're trying to do is get to the level that we consider to be most robust in representing RWA availability. And for you, that level was level 2, which consists of bidders and sub-bidders and awardees from your accounts payable and purchase order data. Now, here are the findings. There are two types of availability that we look at. RWA, which is based on your data, and Data Axle, which is a national business database that allows us to look at those firms that are potentially available to you, but don't necessarily meet the ready, willing, and able standard. So as you look at this table, and you can study it more at a later time, what we're seeing is a comparison of RWA to Data Axle based on percentage participation of the total. And that total is important as well. So in RWA, if we look at the total number of firms that we looked at across all procurement categories, then that represented 1,893 firms. Of that amount, minority and women-owned firms represented 9%, which was about 171 firms. If we look at Data Axle, there was a total of 7,979 firms. And while MWBEs only represented about 5%, that 5% represented 394 firms of the total. So as you're looking at this table, along with the additional data that is captured in the overall report, that is how you compare these tables. The difference between RWA and Data Axle may suggest that additional outreach is needed to improve the participation from that 171 of RWA total MBE firms to get closer to that 394. Another number that's not on here, but that is equally important, is the number of OMSB certified firms, MWBEs certified by the state of South Carolina. There were 4,780 firms on that list. So comparing that to the 171 who are ready, willing, and able, you can see that there may be some room for outreach and working to include those firms in your opportunities. Utilization is a very straightforward analysis. It is the actual procurement, award, or purchasing activity of CCSD, who you did business with. We looked at 3 sources of data to determine this analysis: contract awards, purchase orders, and payments. Typically, we look at architecture and engineering, construction and construction-related services. We're using contract awards because we're trying to capture subcontracting data from those databases. However, because of the low level of dollar values that were available to us through contract awards, we relied on purchase orders, which was capturing more data and more award data across all procurement categories for every procurement category. Also, when we look at utilization analysis, we slice and dice the data by several categories. First, procurement categories, then by race, gender, and ethnicity. Relevant market, we try to look at prime and subcontractor utilization where available, and then we look at competitive and non-competitive thresholds, or said differently, informal and formal thresholds. Here, what we're seeing is a comparison of RWA availability and utilization, the foundation of the disparity ratio. However, I note for all of those who are doing those calculations right now in your head that you cannot finalize the disparity ratio without the statistical significance testing, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the disparity study findings. But I will scroll through each of the procurement categories so you get an idea of what these findings are. The actual dollar values that are associated with these percentages are represented in the full report. So just for example, looking at non-MWSBEs, blue represents utilization. So non-MWBEs, based on this analysis, is showing that they secured 19.4 0.19% of total A&E dollars, whereas they were available at 30.99% of total firms that were available to do business with you in the category of A&E. So that's how you interpret these charts. Here we have it for construction. If you look at African Americans, you see that they are almost equal when you're looking at both utilization and availability. Utilization is 8.34%, while availability is 8.20%. When we look at WBEs, alternatively, they're being utilized at a rate of 2.92%, while they're actually available in the marketplace at 13.67%. Next, we have professional services, and what we're showing is beyond African Americans and WBEs, like in many of the other categories, Asian, Hispanic, Native Americans, and other MWBEs are not only being utilized at very small rates, but they're also available at very small rates. Professional services is showing a similar pattern, with non-MWBEs securing almost 73% of total dollars in the professional services category. And the next largest group is SBEs, followed by WBEs. Lastly, we look at goods and supplies. Non-MWBEs are taking over 83% of the dollars in this procurement category because of the nature of goods and supplies and the level of the purchases that are made in this category. Typically, we expect to see low participation and availability in this category, but of course, there's always room for improvement. So let's now move on to the disparity study findings. The ratio is a very simple calculation of utilization over availability. What we're looking for here is that the courts have said if we fall into that lower quadrant of significant underutilization, we can draw an inference of discrimination from that. If it falls into that blue band, the courts have said we can't draw an inference there because that is basically due to chance. Here we have the disparity study ratio findings showing whether there's overutilization, underutilization, and the S means statistically significant, the NS means non-statistically significant. Here is another viewing of that table in a chart form. Anything above that black line is overutilization. Anything below that black line is underutilization. If it's in blue, it is non-statistically significant. If it is red, it is statistically significant. And I apologize, it's a lot of information that we're going through really quickly, but here's where the rubber meets the road. We're now in recommendations. Here's where we can draw inferences of discrimination. Those items that are highlighted in blue, and those items that are highlighted in blue and have an asterisk are those areas where we can draw an inference of discrimination, because that's where we have statistically significant disparity. In terms of the recommendations, and I'm going to end it on this slide, but please keep in mind there are other slides that go into the recommendations in much more detail. But let me focus on some of the high-level points that are important to you. And we have highlighted in bold those areas where we believe you should pay attention to first in line. In terms of enhancing your procurement recommendations, governance and procurement oversight structures, ensuring that those are in place to ensure that not only is there sufficient oversight of the procurement process, but that also the public has a way of having transparency and accountability through its elected officials who are overseeing and approving contracts at certain formal levels. It's also important that You focus on having an inclusive procurement environment and not simply goal attainment. The bottom line is we're looking to see if your system is open, fair, and transparent, and not simply whether you have the support to have a race and gender conscious goal. Monitoring and tracking both at the bid level and post-award is also very important. In terms of long-term availability, what is very important is increasing competition, and it is important to build your pipeline, not only through outreach, but through creating joint ventures, mentor protege, and other mechanisms that allow you to bring in outside firms and partner them with your local firms without taking away work from your local firms. In terms of MWP participation at the prime level, it is important to note that the goal is yours first and that your vendors are supporting you in achieving your goals. It is also important to note that SBE and LBE set-asides and sheltered markets are considered race neutral. So you can be much more aggressive with set-asides and sheltered markets, using them to support small businesses and local businesses
Sherry.
in your area. So
I'm
with
sorry,
that, I'll stop.
Sherry, can you repeat that last point? Can you go back up to that last point, please? We just didn't hear.
On the SBE?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Oh, the set aside, I'm sorry.
Okay. SBE and LBE, local business enterprise set-asides and sheltered markets, are considered race neutral. So you can be much more aggressive in pursuing inclusion through SBE and support of your local businesses through set-asides and shelter market. You have to be much more careful when using it for race and gender conscious initiatives. And in fact, the court frowns upon set-asides using race and gender conscious tools. So given that building your pipeline and doing business at the prime level, looking at participation through SBE and local business enterprise programs is an important tool for you to use. And so I'll stop there on the recommendations and entertain any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions from any of the committee members or staff members at this point? Because no questions.
I guess I'm interested in the staff's, perspective in response to the recommendations.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just getting ready to ask Shauna, if she could kind of share with us maybe what the plan is and the conversation has been with Miller.
Thank you for the question. So where we are right now, we just have finalized the actual study itself. So the next steps are to take the recommendations provided by Miller and re-engage internally to figure out what's digestible for the organization and realistic for us to implement. It's not a commitment to saying that we're going to take every recommendation and implement, but we need to be able to do that analysis and review to figure out what the district can digest and implement. As far as operational procedures, it's something that also needs to be discussed and reviewed at the cabinet level with the administration and Mr. Kennedy. It has implications, grave implications for Mr. Baroi's shop as well. So he'll be a part of that conversation as well. So right now it's just us having the results, reviewing the recommendations, and then reconvening internally and with the Miller 3 team to figure out next steps.
I want to ask for specifics, but based on your initial review, and I'm asking both you and Jeff this question, do you see potentially some recommendations that you don't feel you will either will be able to implement?
We have not had a chance to dive into it, Ms. Green, so I don't want to answer prematurely.
All right, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just wasn't sure. Okay.
I would just offer, Ms. Green, I'm pleased with the results from the construction perspective. disappointed in the results from the architect engineer perspective. And I'm really interested in getting the list of firms that are available, Hispanic, Native American, African American, A&E firms that could do work for schools. Can't wait to see that list and reach out and see if we can help them understand our process for getting work in the district.
And where does that list come from? I mean, where are you going to find that list?
I'm hoping to receive it from,
Miller. Oh,
right, I
okay.
mean, they had the
Okay,
numbers
good.
in there.
Yeah,
Hopefully they
so-
have the names of the firms
Okay.
that I can then reach out, make sure that they are aware of what we're doing from an architect engineer perspective.
Okay.
And I would like to add, Ms. Green, so as we've gone through this process, there were some things that Miller identified early on that we mitigated midstream. So the 250,000 list was birthed out of the study that goes to audit and finance. Additionally, revamping the direct negotiations process that also no longer exists. All that said, I would like to highlight that we have made and met the board required MBE participation, SWBE participation. We've actually exceeded it by 13%. So any processes that we change, we have to really evaluate how that's also going to impact our ability to meet the goal. And these initiatives should actually help us. So we just need to do that deep dive into looking at this further.
And I guess I would just say that I think that's a good point. Even though the state has its requirement on us, I think, us trying to exceed that is always something that we should try to do to the extent that we can. Do you?
And Ms. Green, if I could, I concur with you on that. Many times municipalities view goals as the ceiling. And often we encourage municipalities and entities to treat it as the floor. And so to the extent that you can elevate your intentionality in this space and securing and working with small and minority-owned businesses, those are always helpful for an organization. Like diversity is always good to ensure you're getting adequate costs and competitive markets. And so part of the reason why we talk about increasing competition, one of the things that we did see is you can argue for a concentration in a certain number of businesses continually bidding for opportunities. And so we want to make that pool as diverse as possible. And to Jeff's point earlier, we will definitely submit to you both those firms who met the RWA criteria, as well as those firms who made up our master MWBE listing, which is a concatenation of a bunch of different disparate directories to support any outreach efforts that the district would entertain.
Thank you.
In your process, did you guys look at the state process that's used to register firms as minority within the state so that they can be recognized as state small business minority firm? Because that process tends to turn some smaller vendors off because of the complexity of it.
Mm-hmm. The state's directory, we did consider the process itself for becoming certified is not a part of the study, but we do recognize that many businesses have concerns around certification, not just the rigor associated with achieving certification, but also to the extent that that rigor doesn't lend itself or automatically connect itself to opportunities, is a space that leaves small and minority-owned businesses concerned about the validity of the process in and of itself.
Mr. Kennedy, did you have a comment? I saw you bringing the.
Yeah, I just briefly. First of all, just a reminder of why we did the study. So this has been, a couple of years ago at least that we embarked on this, and we were, as a district, making decisions without enough data and enough analysis. So when you take a look at what Miller 3 has done, they talked about this in the industry analysis, the statistical analysis, the market analysis, and this idea of the RWA rather. It's RWA. So now we have the data to be able to make informed decisions. I think the PowerPoint here is 40-something slides, in which the Miller 3 went on review not 100% of those slides. Is my understanding the full report exceeds 400 pages. And so it's going to take a minute, take a while for, I don't mean a lengthy period of time, but staff, I think the review was just concluded last week. And so it's going to take a little bit of time for staff to sit down and do the analysis and come back to the Audit and Finance Committee with appropriate next steps.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kennedy. Any other questions or comments from the committee members? Ms. Miller, thanks again for you and your team's work with this, and we anticipate that it's going to be, helpful to us going forward. And I don't know if this concludes you being here, or you are not finished until you get your responses back. So I guess you'll still be around a little bit, but thank you so much for helping, to get this information to us so that we can take a look at it, analyze it, and see what we can do.
We have enjoyed working with the district. We applaud the districts for its courageousness to even embark upon doing these disparity studies. At times, they are met with contention, but it's really, from our perspective, they're done in a way to triage the organization, understanding those things that impact an inclusive procurement environment. And for those things that you do well currently, we want to amplify those and recognize them. And where there are opportunity areas, we want to share them with you in hopes that the board and leadership sees the rationale and need for continuing to improve its efforts in this space. And so we are overly excited to be here, and we will remain around and available to the district throughout the continuation as you decide whether or not you implement or not, and we're available to support in those efforts as well.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. So Shauna, you had audit day today. Last month it was Jeff, but today it's are there any other questions or comments? If not, the next item on the agenda is the fixed costs of ownership for the year end for fiscal year 22 year end, Mr. Barori.
All right, thank you. All right, we're on the screen. Everyone can see the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Really appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation today. It's the culmination of a lot of hard work by our staff, and also gives the board, the Audit Finance Committee, an opportunity to see some of the fruits of their efforts in improving budgets in the past. And hopefully our county board will see that, and the public will see that as well with these slides that are here in front of you. I want to thank Stephanie Allen from the Capital Projects Accounting team who put these slides together with the help of our program managers. It is a picture tutorial of some of the work that's been done, as well as a little bit of data, but I'll quickly go through this and you can spend a little bit more time at your leisure. For those of you that don't remember, the fixed cost of ownership is for repairs, renovations, and replacements. This covers the FY22 program. We began planning this program in detail in the fall of 2020. You all approved it in February of 21. We began executing in the summer of 21, and we're now in the final stages of project closeout at this point. This is the scorecard of where we stand. 575 projects across the district. You can see them distributed across each of the constituent districts. This represents about $46 million of work across 14 program areas, many of which I'll provide some slides on here from this point forward. The biggest program by far is facilities management, a little over $13 million, internal and external to buildings and grounds. You can see some of the highlights listed across the board here, from roofing to fencing, internal air conditioning controls, painting, tree trimming, etc. Big program. Some pictures that go along with that. We've got scoreboard replacements. So some of the funding does go toward toward athletics. We've got Baptist Hill and St. John's here before and after. We've got academic magnets weight room renovations before or during and after, I guess you could call it. Weight rooms are obviously a big thing with our schools these days, and we've had a pretty aggressive effort to improve weight rooms across the district for our athletes and also for folks just staying in better shape. We also take care of our bus lots. You can see the trailer replacement here at St. John's High School for District 9. Big difference there. Quality of workplace for our bus drivers. Canopies can be a very complicated project because they have to be hurricane resistant. So it isn't just putting up a couple of columns and an overhead. This is Minnie Hughes providing very welcome rain relief for our car riders entering the schools. We try to take advantage of putting these in wherever it makes sense across the district. Safety is also a consideration in facility management. You can see here the new vestibule here at Calhoun Street. It's now enter for the receptionist from the HR office. We're providing a significant increase in safety for that individual. Also frees up space in the vestibule area for security screening for board meetings. Next program is playgrounds. 1.35 million going to playgrounds. We got 3 new ones in place, 2 of which are shown here, before and after for Goodwin and Harborview. We also install artificial turf, rubber surfaces, as well as the maintenance that goes with the existing services is paid for out of this program. Security and emergency management, 2.25 million. Majority of that goes toward camera replacements. They're on about a 10-year cycle. But we have over 8,000 cameras in the district, which is a pretty large program to manage, obviously. We also do access controls. We have more than 2,000 access controls in the district as well. This program also replaces radios. One of the newer initiatives is the last bullet there, installing lightning detection at our athletic fields, which provides us real-time information to detect lightning, to pause athletic events so that we remain safe on those sites. IT, this captures a lot of programs. All told, it's about $9 million worth of work. On the left-hand side, you can see some of the things that are purchased with this funding, purchased and installed internal to the schools, to the external with the marquee signs. We also cover our backbone, our system backbone, items on the far right that keep our overall systems up and running. Not shown because there's no great pictures of it, as we fund software and IT consolidates the district needs and puts that forward. And that's about a $10 million investment across the district, including the learning services side of the house. Media modernization, this is updates to our libraries, not only looking at print and digital books, but also the equipment that supports the schools. You can see the Magic Cutter at the bottom right, which replaced some systems that were more than 15 years old. It's about a $1.2 million program all told. In addition to books and the specialty equipment is furniture for our libraries. More than $270,000 of this budget went toward libraries. Styles Point was replaced, some new media center equipment at Cario Middle School, and very good program. We matched that up with facilities to do carpeting and other facilities work at the same time when this program is being executed. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment, $1.6 million, primarily in classrooms, but also when you look across in office desks, file cabinets, storage equipment, bookcases, library or reception areas and lobbies, as well as cafeteria equipment is replaced with this funding. Fine arts, a relatively small dollar value from small dollar value from that perspective, but a very loud program. We've got strings for 9 schools this past year, and we've got band equipment for 11 schools this year, a little less than $200,000. Athletics, The first thing we do is take a look at safety. Football helmets are number one, but then we take a look at our equipment requirements and spread that across the district, that we rack and stack the requirements from our schools, a $250,000 program for athletic equipment. Career and technology, for the last 2 years, the board approved significant increases in this program to support basically gut and replace at West Ashley High School and Military Magnet, their culinary arts programs. This year's program, a little over $3.5 million, allowed us to complete West Ashley. I've got the slide here next, but continue on with the design and planning for Military Magnet, which is being executed this year with the FY23 funds. There's the picture of West Ashley culinary arts renovation.
Nice.
Yeah, very nice. Planning and real estate, they handle the auditorium and district regional stadium equipment. And you can see some of the items here that they used their $250,000 for West Ashley High, the D4 Stadium, Burke, as well as audio speakers at several of the auditoriums across the district. Transportation, this takes care of our cameras on our buses, as well as the replacement of our activity buses. We did get 6 new activity buses with the FY22 budget, which was about $965,000. Nutrition services, this program was added 2 years ago. On the right, you can see an example of the serving lines that were replaced, 11 of those across the district. And we also purchased 2 vans. We've had a significant problem with staffing our Mount Pleasant schools, and by offering transportation for staff from Bridgeview and North Charleston, we're able to keep those schools staffed up and manned, and it saves our workers from having to make that huge drive every day. And lastly, our nursing program, this is a new first year program in FY22. The board allocated $108,000 for nursing services. You can see some of the items they began replacing: medication carts, recovery cots, emergency bags for the schools, AED and vision screeners. So subject to your questions, that closes the FY22 recap, another highly successful program, and I thank the committee for supporting it.
Any questions for Jeff? I'd just like to say it's very impressive. Yeah, I went through these and at home, and I started looking at them, and I mean, it's really, really impressive. So, please commend your staff
Will
for
do.
the hard
It's
work.
across the district,
Yeah.
learning services, operations, finance, et cetera. Good team in place.
So let me ask you this question. I know that you decide projects based on where the highest need is. You try to go through and analyze what needs to be done and then look at it from a safety perspective, et cetera, et cetera. All things being equal, how do you ensure that you are distributing, well, not necessarily the funds, but that projects that you are looking at the projects across the district and maybe trying to equalize what goes on in each district? Is there any, you understand what I'm saying? Any thought about, making sure that the North Charleston schools aren't overlooked, or making sure that the Mount Pleasant schools aren't overlooked? When I say overlooked, I mean, just aren't getting things because we don't have the money. How do you equalize that?
So as much as possible, we base our replacement on life cycle. So it's really based on the number of years of service. Many of our programs our systems are like that. And then we do take a step back and take a look at, as you saw on the scorecard, where the projects are and look for any anomalies that might lead us to believe that something slipped through the cracks. So I think from that perspective, we have a pretty even balance. Although not fixed cost of ownership, we've taken a hard look at that from the sales tax program, where we look at how much has been funded over the last 20 years across the entire district to make sure that it's been done fairly. And then lastly, I will point out that our biggest program is facility management. And FM has a very detailed facilities assessment program where every year they update their chiclet chart, red, yellow, green, for each of their building systems. And we take a hard look at making sure that across the entire district, across all the schools, that we have a fair representation of green, yellow, and red, hopefully no red. But we really do pay attention to where the money's going after we do that initial assessment.
Okay. Fair enough.
Good question.
Well, again, thanks to you and staff. I mean, it's very impressive report. Any comments or questions from anyone else on the committee? Okay, and please make sure you do that report in its fullest at the board meeting. You know how we sometimes run through things? I'll talk to you about it. Monthly capital projects report. Ms. Costello, how are you doing out there today?
I'm great, Ms. Green, and thank you all. Good afternoon. I'd like to present the September capital projects report. Our revenue collections were $2.6 million above our 2% projection. For expenditures this month, our 2010 through 2016 program had $17,000 in expenditures. The 2017 through 2022 program had $7.2 million in expenditures. The 2023 through 2028 program had $1.1 million in expenditures. And the 2023-2028 long-term debt projects, we didn't have any expenditures this month. The fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 22 year-end recap was just presented by Jeff. And I too would also like to publicly thank Ms. Stephanie Allen on my team for her hard work on this item presented. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Ms. Costello? Well, thank you very much, as always. The next item is approval of projects over $250,000. Ms. Williams?
Mr. Wiltshire on, I'll let him cover the list.
Okay. Welcome.
Wayne, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, Ms. Green and Audit and Finance Committee. The list for the weekend in October the 21st, 2022 consists of 7 contracts with a total value of $6.1 million. Are there any questions?
Any questions on any of the items listed for approval of $250,000 or more? Does any of the committee have any questions about them? If not, I will entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
The next item, I'm not sure if I need to, I think you need to maybe preside over I'm gonna turn this over to Shauna for her to handle, and I am going to abstain on this particular issue. So
Thank you, Ms. Green. The next item is for the appointment of Ms. Joyce Green to the Audit and Finance Committee. So just for some background, Ms. Green was appointed to the Audit and Finance Committee in January 2020 as one of the board representatives. In November 2020, she was appointed as the committee chair. As her tenure on the Board of Trustees ends in November 2022, she has graciously agreed to extend her membership on the Audit and Finance Committee, and she's expressed that interest. So today, the motion is for the board to approve appointing Ms. Joyce Green to the Audit and Finance Committee for 2 years as a community member.
Motion to approve.
Second.
So is now our opportunity to express all of our reservations and objections to Ms. Green?
Should we take this to executive session?
I was expecting that.
No, wholeheartedly sorry, there was already a motion. I guess I can't say my comments since there's already been a motion and second, so I'll just vote in favor. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you, guys. I know y'all thought y'all would get rid of me, but not quite. But thank you for your vote of confidence there. I look forward to working with you guys because you have been a great group to work with. The next item is the monthly financial update.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So just to differentiate, this is a financial update for revenue and expenditure reporting. This does not include the projection process yet. So this is us comparing our revenues and expenses this time this year to this time last year. So just going through the revenues, as of 9/31 this year, we've $41.5 million in revenues received. This time last year, we were at $34.3 million. That's a $6.9 million difference to the better. As far as expenditures, this year, we're currently at $96.2 million. Last year, we were at $92.7 million. There is a difference of about $3.5 million. And the major differences in revenues were just that the local tax revenues and state revenues were higher this year compared to last. This is due to primarily the new state aid classroom funding allocation formula and receiving $6.6 million earlier in the year compared to when EFA revenues were received last year. Expenditures are escalated this time, largely related to the increase in salary and employee benefit cost. And this is due to our teacher salary increase of $2,000 plus the step and step plus increase to maintain 97% of market for classified staff and administrators. Those are the two material changes. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Shauna? Thank you. And the last item on the public agenda is the budget milestone calendar proposal.
Yes,
Shauna?
I have Ms. Carlin on. I will defer to her to cover the preliminary calendar.
Thank you, Shauna. As you can tell, this isn't a draft format, but it's our first look at setting up some preliminary important dates for not only cabinet, but for Audit and Finance Committee, as well as the board engagement. The first thing that as of November 1st, cabinet was going to start doing some strategic planning, which kind of sets the agenda or sets our agenda for what's to come ahead in the next few weeks. And today we have submitted to the Audit and Finance Committee this what we call our milestone budget calendar. So as you can tell, we're getting ready to gear up for the FY24 budget in the next coming weeks, and we'll have more information for everyone in the near future. Any questions? Thank you.
I do just want to add that this calendar is not all inclusive for every single step in the budget development process. That's a much more extensive and involved logistical calendar, but this does highlight overall cabinet and board engagement, as well as other important dates that Ms. Carlin just covered.
And so the plan would be to get feedback from Audit and Finance, and then will you take it to the full board as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are there any comments, suggestions, thoughts from any member of the Audit and Finance Committee? Okay, well, no comments or questions, so I guess, that means we support you moving forward with that. I think it's a good idea to have this as a working document. Yeah. Okay, that concludes the open agenda. We have one item to consider in executive session, so I will close the meeting and ask those persons that are not involved with the executive session item, if you would excuse yourself and I don't see you back on the screen, thank you again for all of your work. Okay, so we are now back in open session. We were given information on a contractual matter in executive session. As a result of that discussion, I will entertain a motion on the action item in executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Yeah, but before we adjourn, Ms. Green, could we revisit our process around?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting ready to, well, I wasn't getting ready to adjourn. I was getting ready to bring that up next. And so, yeah, I concur with both of you. And I think when this happened, I know in a board meeting, I had the same question, because this then goes to the board with the same information that we're being asked to approve. I understand why it happened. So I guess the question would become, what other information would the Audit and Finance Committee members like to see included with this document that would make you feel more comfortable? Because as it is now, policy says that it comes to the Audit and Finance Committee for approval, goes then to the board for approval. So maybe if there were more documentation, we would, members might feel like they had more to look at and see what was going on, or if you have recommendations or thoughts about what would make it more agreeable to you, then let's just throw those things out and talk to staff about that.
I would offer that so I wasn't a part of it. Obviously, this is a board decision as far as what the board wants. But my impression has been that the idea is to create visibility into the types of contracts, and then that visibility in turn allows people to ask questions about things if they choose. So it suggests to me that this is more of an awareness and an information offering, and I'm not eager to create more administrative burden on the staff to create a lot more information to create an approval of these things. It seems like we have the visibility, and if over time individual board members in particular or committee members want more information about a particular purchase, then those questions could be asked. But I'd be less enthusiastic about asking the staff to do a bunch of additional administrative work just for visibility.
And Velma, do you have some suggestions or recommendations of what you would like to see, or are you suggesting that we just receive it as information?
Yes, if it's going to be like this, yes, because I understand that if it's in the solicitation phase, that they will be limited as to the information that they can provide. However, I just think that as opposed to a vote, because we're not really having discussions on any of these, I just think that it should be for information purposes, not to vote on.
Mr. Kennedy, can you respond to that procedurally?
Thank you, ma'am. So the purpose of this process is for the governing body to be able to approve certain all procurements over $250,000. So that's the purpose. And so given that purpose, then they have delegated that responsibility to the Audit and Finance Committee to ensure that what's coming to the full board is appropriate. And so yes, if we were to expand what's being presented to the Audit and Finance Committee, that would entail additional work with staff. But at the same time, I think it's important for some part of the governing body to have some authority to say these procurements are appropriate. And so maybe we staff can go back and take a look at what type of data, that additional data could bring to the Audit and Finance Committee to give the committee more assurance that there's some processes in place that there's processes in place that ensure that the procurements are done appropriately. So I would feel more comfortable doing that versus as an information item to this committee that then goes to the board for a vote.
So just understanding the purpose that it's coming to us is just to say that we have seen the items that's over 250,000. I mean, just trying to understand what I'm voting on is.
Yeah, so before some point in time, I can't remember what time, sometime back in, I think the spring, there were no procurements that went to the board for approval. And so because of a result of a finding in the disparity study, actually, the school board voted to have all procurements over 250,000 come before them for approval. And so since procurement is a process associated with the Audit and Finance Committee, then the board delegate that responsibility to you all for that review, so that when it comes to the Audit and Finance, go to the full board, they have assurance that some place within the governing body, not just the staff, but within the governing body, there's been some review and some assurance that we're making the right decisions on these procedurally with these procurements. Because if it doesn't happen in the Audit and Finance Committee, then it would happen in the full board, which is a bit of a process challenge of it in and of itself.
Well, I don't know that it matters who is approving it, because they're getting the same information. I mean, the board doesn't get anything that Audit and Finance doesn't get. I mean, so it's basically just the information that is provided to Audit and Finance. And I guess, one question could be asked if the Audit and Finance Committee could just be exempt from the process. I mean, I doubt that's going to happen, but if the board is comfortable approving what they get, I guess what I'm hearing from Audit and Finance members, at least two of them, is that they don't feel they are getting enough information to say that they are approving these, certainly I guess that would be the other option.
Well, so what I'm suggesting that perhaps staff takes a look, and that we look at a process to provide more information. So for me, it's like the item we just covered with the land purchase up for Latson. So the Audit and Finance Committee has gone through a review process, understood what the parameters are, asked questions of staff, and so then you are making a recommendation for Audit and Finance Committee to the full board on that. And so it's gone through a review process before it got to the board.
Right.
That was the intent, I believe, of the full board adopting this $250,000 threshold.
Yeah, and I mean, since we started this, there hadn't been like 5 pages of them, so it could be that we could come up with a process, and Velma knows procurement really well, and you may have some suggestions, Velma, of things that you think would be appropriate for the committee to see as they think about maybe adding some documents to what we are asked to review.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to review it, at least maybe they can provide information around, where they are in the process with the solicitations at what phase. Is it just out there posted? Has it closed? Just certain information that they're allowed to provide. And then I did notice in this list that when I first started on the board to now, and I think that was around maybe because of the audit findings, but I see that more is going out for solicitation as opposed to being sole sourced or using some type of exemption. I do notice that we have a lot more going out for solicitation. So I guess that's a good thing, but just understanding, I guess for me, it was just understanding what I was expected to be voting on when we're voting on these procurements. But it would be nice to know where they are in the solicitation phase. Like board exemption number 71017. Everybody doesn't have the exemption, so it would be nice to just have a summary of what that exemption allows for, because sometimes the exemptions used are not the appropriate exemption. So it's just having some information like that so that we can make determinations as to, yes, that's the appropriate exemption for the item being provided. We know where they are in the solicitation process. Just a little bit more information if we're going to vote on it and somebody else is going to take our recommendation and then vote.
Thank you for raising the issue, and thank you for your thoughts on that. We'll ask staff, as Mr. Kennedy said, to look into this and try to make some determination of how you can help us be more responsible for the decisions that we're making with those particular contracts. Okay.
Yeah, they can also tell us, because it's probably part of the solicitation, what's going to be the factors for awarding. What are those factors they're looking at to award under the contract?
We can, thank you. We will provide that. One thing that I do want to kind of fall back on is that we currently have the policy DJ, which is for purchasing. And it's our policy around the procurement code and how we have to align with state code and the designated state agencies, and that any changes to the procurement process would have to go through the board for approval. So we are following the state procurement process. But so do you want information about the process or information about more details about the actual line item itself?
About the line item, I'm taking it that you're following the procurement code. It's just that there are things about each of the purchases that can be disclosed in public, because especially once you put out a solicitation, it becomes public knowledge. So either we are going to go out and read each of these solicitations, or we just get a quick summary of some of the highlights of the solicitation. Maybe a summary of what the solicitation, and I know it says scope of project, but there's a summary within that solicitation of actually what that solicitation is for. In that solicitation is probably what those criterias are that's going to determine that's going to determine the award of the solicitation. So is it cost, is it technical? And so if you're following the code, those things are probably within the solicitation. So if we had information about that, because if there were going to be issues that we might bring up, it's probably around those things. How many people are on the panel? You don't have to give names. They're not going to be able to release the individuals' names, but how many people are going to be on the panel that's reviewing these solicitations? Where are those individuals coming from? Where are you pulling them from? So that it's a representation on the panel of of who's going to be looking at and voting on and selecting these vendors.
Okay, thank you. And I would assume that, as Shauna, as you start to work through this, if you have any more specific questions, you might want to contact, Ms. Stamp and y'all can talk through it further. Okay. The next agenda item is determining board, agenda items. Shauna.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I had items 1 through 12. Let's see.
Not one.
I'm sorry, not 1, 4 through 12. Items
Yeah.
4 through 12, including one executive session item.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. You got that, Trina? Okay, you already know it. The next meeting is December 6th, 2022, and you have someone else sitting in the seat. And again, thank you guys for your support, and have really enjoyed working with you. And